With reviews and benchmarks finally out for the Ryzen 7000 series, I thought I'd take a look at information from various sources to share my thoughts and opinion on the CPUs. Let's discuss that in this video. Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video. Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel and I hope you've all been doing well. The review embargo for the Ryzen 7000 series lifted on Monday morning, and as usual, my YouTube subscription feed and Google News feed was flooded with reviews. I wanted to make a video where I go over some interesting bits of information that I saw from various reviews I watched and read, mainly because I was someone who expressed that I wasn't excited about the series when it was first announced, but obviously at that time there weren't any independent benchmarks out, and I wanted to revisit this topic to see, well, maybe I was wrong. Now, I have taken a look at a wide variety of reviews. You'd have been wise to do the same, as with a new platform and generation, results from different testers can vary. This way, you get a more clear picture on how the CPUs perform, and it gives you a better idea on what can happen if it's paired with different hardware, like RAM, cooler, GPU, and more. One of the sites that I like to read reviews on is ComputerBase. This is a very well-known, reputable German hardware site who create pretty thorough reviews, and I'll have links to all the reviews I mentioned in the video description. One of the things that I personally like about their testing is that they stick with stock memory configurations in their CPU testing. What you might have noticed was that there were many reviewers out there that tested with some pretty high-end DDR5 6000 CL30 memory, and this was because AMD insisted on reviewers to test their CPUs with this configuration, since they stated that this was the sweet spot for Zen 4. The problem with this is that 1, this will obviously showcase performance that will be faster than slower kits, but not everyone is going to be rocking those kits because 2, they cost around $250 to $300, which is really expensive. So people will see performance results that they probably won't even be able to attain, whereas testing with stock configurations for the CPUs gives you a more baseline result. In their IPC test, we can see that the 7950X is about 12.4% faster than the last gen 5950X, which I thought was great because this lines up with AMD's claim of 13% IPC uplift from Zen 3 to Zen 4. In their single core test, we can see that they found the stock 7950X to be about 5% faster than the stock 12900K, and we can also see that their 7700X is also in that same neighborhood. They did also include tests using various power modes, which we will talk about later on in the video. But for now, we can see that Ryzen 7000 is holding the single core crown, though Intel is pretty much right there, so not a huge win for them. When it comes to multi-core performance, this is where things get really good. In their classic multi-core test, the Ryzen 9 7950X is just in a class of its own compared to last gen and Intel. What I found really impressive was that now we have a 16-core part on the mainstream platform that is able to compete with a 32-core Threadripper HEDT CPU from 2019. AMD has definitely made some tremendous strides when it comes to their multi-core performance. This was something that I wasn't really worried about at all. I probably glossed over it in my initial impressions video because when I had expressed my negativity, it was mainly surrounding their gaming performance, but I probably should have made that clear that I wasn't underwhelmed by the multi-core performance improvements, so that one is on me. The 7700X is also doing really well too. You can see that when it comes to multi-core, it slots in between last gen's 12-core 5900X and Intel's 12700K, which is an 8-core CPU with 4 E-cores, so it's technically a 12-core as well, but remember, E-cores are smaller, they don't clock as high, and they don't offer hyper-threading either. Regardless, it's still an impressive feat for an 8-core to be punching above its weight class like that. With that said, you will see the stance also change in the upcoming future. There's a reason why AMD pushed these CPUs as hard as they did, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. In common productivity apps, you can see that these Ryzen 7000 CPUs are no slouch. I kind of get why both AMD and Intel killed off their mainstream HEDT platforms. It's because these higher core count CPUs from modern mainstream platforms are getting so fast that it just doesn't make much sense for them to continue to produce those CPUs when these ones offer performance that is ample for the vast majority of users in the productivity space. Taking a look at some productivity benchmarks from Tech Power Up, and the reason why I bring their results up is because ComputerBase didn't have a 7900X included in their test, but here we see that it's pretty similar to what we saw from ComputerBase's review, where the 7950X is offering chart-topping performance in these tasks, and the 7900X is trailing right behind it. In my personal opinion, I feel like AMD should have focused more on workstation and productivity benchmarks during their initial launch event. These were clearly designed with those tasks in mind, and Zen 4 will thrive in the data center. Moving on to gaming, and this is where things, not surprisingly, aren't that impressive. Computer Base conducted their gaming benchmarks using a RTX 3090 Ti, so currently the fastest gaming GPU that's available on the market, and this was at 720p, so that factor of a GPU bottleneck is nearly gone. In their overall results, we can see that both the 7700X and 7950X edge out the 12900K, but lost to AMD's own 5800X 3D. That does sound familiar. Do you guys remember what I said in that video? One of the other things I wanted to point out was that here they mention a 5% increase on average. If you go back and take a look at the slides where they showcase the 5800X 3D against the 12900K, you can see similar improvements, if not even more. What this means is that Zen 4 probably isn't going to be that much faster than the 5800X 3D. So it turns out that ended up being true. In their tests, we can see that the 7950X, which is the fastest gaming CPU in the Zen 4 family, loses to AMD's 5800X 3D in many games. Though it's not a huge margin, but Linus Tech Tips also conducted their gaming benchmarks in a similar manner, and also found that the 5800X 3D was overall faster when compared to AMD's new 7000 series. Still, as I had mentioned from the start of the video, it's always a good idea to take a look at multiple reviews from different reviewers. In Tech Power Up's gaming benchmarks, we can see that at 720p, testing with an RTX 3080, they found that the 7900X was about 5% faster than the 5800X 3D, and for that matter, all Zen 4 CPUs outperformed the 5800X 3D. Steve from Hardware Unboxed in his testing also found that the 7600X and 7950X outperformed the 5800X 3D in their testing, but again, the margins weren't anything earth-shattering here. What I do appreciate Linus pointing out in their review was that if you're looking at platform costs, when comparing the 5800X 3D to the 7700X, the price difference was very significant. Even if you were to swap out the 7700X for a 7600X, you'd still come out with cash to spare on the 5800X 3D side. And that was one of the biggest gripes I had with the 7000 lineup when they came out, but we'll talk more about that later on. All in all, it seems like the 7000 series is essentially trading blows with Alder Lake and AMD's own 5800X 3D when it comes to gaming. I suspect Raptor Lake to also fit in somewhere there in that skirmish, but my outlook on the 5800X 3D has completely changed as to what it was when it first announced. This CPU is basically like the 1080 Ti of CPUs. It's going to be haunting future generations because it's just so damn good. On the bright side, this actually bodes really well for when AMD releases Zen 4 3D, which comes out next year. Because if Zen 4 is basically giving you Zen 3D-like performance, then just imagine how fast Zen 4 will be with 3D stacked cache. That is what I'm extremely excited for, and I'm highly anticipating. Also, hopefully by then, DDR5 pricing will come down too. Moving away from performance, there are two big caveats, well, kind of, with Zen 4. The first is that AMD has now made it so that these CPUs will hit 95C under load by design, and they say it's perfectly normal. The reasoning behind this is that they just want to make it so that the CPU is taking full advantage of its thermal headroom to not leave any performance on the table. Your choice of cooler here becomes extremely important now because the CPUs are now boosting right away to TJ Maxx, which is 95C, as opposed to their default PPT. So having a stronger cooling solution, such as a beefy 360mm AIO, like the Arctic Liquid Freezer 2 360, will allow for better performance. Granted, you're just using auto settings, and a lot of reviewers were testing their CPUs using 360 AIOs running at full speed, which again, in a controlled environment, that's what they're going to do, but then you have to ask yourself, what's the average person going to do? Are you now considering spending more money on getting a beefy CPU cooler? Are you willing to put up with hearing your CPU fans ramp up and down? Or are you okay with running your cooler at 100% all the time? I'm sure someone will test this soon, but I would love to see someone test a 7950X using multiple CPU cooling solutions. So I'm talking about a single air tower cooler, dual air tower cooler, 240mm AIO, 360mm AIO, and compare them to see how it impacts performance. Computer Base did actually test this out during an AV1 encode using an NHD15S, so a very popular dual tower air cooler, versus MSI's K360 AIO, and they found that Performance did go down when using the air tower cooler, but not by much. You can here see that the clock speeds are lower, but it's not a significant margin. You can write that off as negligible. An interesting note they left was that the effect from the cooler change is surprisingly small. The Ryzen 7 7700X doesn't even drop the temperature, suggesting that dissipating the power dissipation on just a 5nm chiplet to the heat spreader is the problem and not the cooling heat spreader. The wording and translation might be a little bit off there. This is using a translator after all. This reminded me of the video Gerbauer recently made where he delidded the 7950X for direct die cooling and found that in Cinebench R20's multi-core test, there was a drop of around 20 degrees Celsius, which is just insane. He also mentioned this because typically when he's done these types of tests, it's resulted in 10, maybe 12, 15 degrees Celsius drop. But I guess AMD has quite a lot of work to do on improving their IHS for next gen. The second thing I wanted to talk about was power draw. Hardware Unboxed measured power draw during a Blender workload, and Blender is a very core-heavy workload that pushes all the cores to 100%, and found power draw is significantly up, where the 7600X is comparable to the 8-core 5800X from the previous generation, 7700X matches the 12-core 5900X, and the 7950X is comparable to Intel's 12900K. Just compare the 7600X to the 5800X, the total system power draw has gone up like 52%. Therefore, if you're someone who's going to be using these heavy productivity apps with Ryzen 7000, make sure you have a beefy power supply and a good cooling solution, especially if you plan on using a next generation RTX 40 series graphics card. Now, if you're primarily a gamer, you might be wondering, well dang, do I now have to upgrade my PSU as well? Probably not. What I liked about Tech Power Up's review was that in their power consumption portion of the review, they did a game-by-game breakdown of the 7950X in various games they tested. Keep in mind this is chip power only, not total system power draw. They found on average throughout all the games they tested, the 7950X using stock settings only used like 87 watts of power, which is nothing to be worried about. That is slightly higher than the previous generation 5950X, and the rest of the 7000 series aligns with that. So for gaming, it's really a non-issue, and that makes sense because games aren't really pushing all your cores to 100% usage. The other benefit is that since it's not going to be pushed so hard, it gives the chip a lot more headroom to boost the clocks further, which results in higher performance. If you are worried about higher power consumption and temps, there is an easy and straightforward way to remedy that. You can simply use eco mode options that are included in your motherboard's BIOS, or you can manually tune the CPU using a custom PPT, TDC, and EDC limit. I did actually show this not too long ago for the 5800X, which is known to be very power hungry and hot, where temps and overall power was lower. PC World dived into this topic and they found that with the 7950X running at eco mode 105 and 65, system power consumption was cut down significantly. In terms of scores, you're obviously going to see a decrease in something like Cinebench R23, but this is a synthetic benchmark which will exaggerate the differences, whereas in real-world performance, you will find that the differences are, very, very small. The same is also true for gaming. OC3D in their review tested gaming performance and found that compared to stock, there was basically no difference in performance when using these eco modes. The benefit of using these power tweaking modes is that you significantly cut down on power, which will be helpful in areas where electricity is expensive. You reduce your temps, which also means lower noise. To me, it seems like AMD took a page out of Nvidia's book with Zen 4, where they pushed the silicon as hard as it could go, and perhaps there was a reason for that. Maybe they felt threatened by something. Nonetheless, Zen 4 is quite the efficient architecture, but it gets overshadowed because AMD said, forget about the sweet spot on the efficiency curve, dial it up to 11. After taking all of this info into account, my stance on Zen 4 hasn't changed. The performance they offer when it comes to multi-core is good. Gaming performance turned out to be exactly where I'd expected it, where they trade blows with Alder Lake and 5800X3D, so it wasn't anything to get hyped up over. Power and temps can be tamed if you're willing to tune the chips, otherwise be prepared to have a beefy cooling solution and power supply. My biggest gripe with these chips is pricing. The 7950X and 7900X, not so much, since those CPUs are in a segment where users will be using it for workstation tasks to probably generate money, so in those segments, pricing may not even be on the top of their priority list, and like I said, those CPUs are in a class of their own when it comes to multi-core, so it's justifiable. Where things get really messy for Zen 4 is the 7700X and 7600X. Intel officially announced their Raptor Lake processors recently, and the i5 13600K 14-core and 13700K 16 core, especially the KF models, are gonna give AMD a run for their money. Not only are they priced in the same range, they offer more cores, so better multi-core performance, similar gaming performance while allowing users to pair them with cheaper DDR4 and cheaper motherboard prices. Have you guys taken a look at these board prices for the X670? They're crazy. I know AMD will have cheaper B650 boards coming soon, but also keep in mind if they're starting at 125, which is kind of high compared to last gen, at that price point, you're going to get a very cheap, bare bones, bottom of the barrel board, which really won't have that many features loaded onto it, whereas you can find decent Z690 boards already for under $200 and pair those with a 13600K. The argument of future support comes up. I personally never recommend hardware based on future promises, but for the here and now, and I discussed this in my follow-up vid that AM5 support is pretty misleading marketing. Zen 4 is a stepping stone generation, a gateway into AM5 and DDR5. I'd say you're much better off finding deals on last gen parts and waiting a few years for this tech to mature if you want to upgrade. Better gaming performance will definitely come with Zen 4 3D, and that is what I'm really excited for and anticipating. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.